are now.
Efendim.
Okay. And over to you, Nicola.
Okay, thank you very much, Dawn. That's brilliant. So hello to Sophie as well, who's one of my old students who's just said hello. So, hi, Sophie.
Onu ben araştırdım. Onu otomatik olarak ödemişler. O saatin numarasını falan verirseniz ancak öyle yaparım. Onu otomatik olarak Kasım, Aralık, Ocak, Şubat, Mart ayına bölerekten 66 pound.
Habib, are you keep yourself on mute? Thank you. So, I'm going to share my screen and go to a really, I promise, short PowerPoint.
I just want to butt in there and say that there is this PowerPoint, if it's the same one, there is a PowerPoint in the chat which you can download.
It's slightly different to this one, so that will be useful for when we get to the workshop bit to download that bit as well. So really quick PowerPoint. My Instagram account there is at Perren Studios. I've just changed the name of it, so actually you can't search for it at the moment, but if you type it in, then you'll find me. There is a Perren Studio. I'm Perren Studio, so check that out if you want to see a bit more about what I do. And I just want to talk through a few of the things that we are going to do this evening. Okay, so my name's Nicola Perren. I'm a freelance designer, designer maker, and also have been a tutor for over 20 years. So at university primarily, but I've taught a lot of teachers as well and worked with people in preparation for going to university. But I'm teaching drawing, weave, stitch, and I've been developing print collections recently. So what's wrap and weave all about? Okay, I kind of like base it very loosely around the idea of constructed cloth. Okay, and it can be really loose, or actually it can be quite prescribed. So I think there's a number of different ways of accessing it. And as I go through this quick PowerPoint, you'll see that there's images of ideas of wraps, and they're in sketchbooks, they're on mood boards, and it just shows how you can kind of make really nice connections with drawing. I always bring most things back to drawing at some point. Okay, I also play around with them. I think they're a really nice extension of drawing with yarns, so you can bring drawing materials into it as well, and it can be a precursor for weaving, but I think it's also a really nice thing for when you're developing other textile or other non-textile based material focused ideas as well. And finally, I think it's really accessible in terms of skills, but also cost, which I've always thought is really important to be able to kind of like do things with things that you've got around. Okay, so I kind of categorize 4 types of yarn wraps, or kind of like weaving wraps. Okay, 2 of them we're not going to cover today. Okay, so the first one is basic and is probably, if you've done any kind of like yarn wraps in the past, this is something you'll know about. One of the areas that I think is really important for students or in my own practice to acknowledge is how you can kind of like use yarn wraps to proportionally be suggestive of colour. I often see people doing yarn wraps and doing yarn weavings on card and things, but they always keep the colours always to the same proportion, which is very unlike how it's going to happen in cloth. So I like to kind of like really play with those proportions here. Okay, got a dog barking away as well here, so keeping us on our toes. We've then got complex, and I think they're kind of like a play on yarn wraps, but building them up more slowly. Okay, and you have to do it in a particular order. So when I've gone through the kind of like demos and when we've done some things in a minute, I can show you how these look from the back. So if you don't understand how these are made up, then feel free just to ask away and I'll show you. There's no deep secrets here. Okay, I do really love them because they're really suggestive of woven pattern as well. So the drawing, so this is one of the this is where we're going to finish the session on, and I've broken it down into 2 kind of like mini workshops. If you're really enjoying the first one and you just want to carry on with that one, then you don't have to do the second one. Okay, you can just carry on working. You might actually be quite happy to have your feet up, supping a cup of tea and just listening and making notes. But through these drawing based ones, this is where I'm really interested in exploring different materials. So I've got a big wax crayon on there, I've got felt, and there's wrapping and knotwork happening in here rather than any weaving. Okay, and of course I've got a thing about big orange stickers. Can't go wrong with those, just like googly eyes. So I also like to kind of bring in lots of kind of like fun elements into my wraps, but just the idea about how you can kind of connect with drawings, with samples, and just really be suggestive of how you might want to kind of play around with materials. Okay, so the first little workshop we're going to do is we're actually going to do some weaving on card. Okay, I don't know how many of you here are weavers already, so you may have done something like this before, you may recognize these structures, but what I like about this is something that people who have got a lot, who don't know how to run a loom, for example. Okay, so on this card wrap, for example, we've got 5 different structures. We've got a plain weave, we've got a 1 and 3 twill, a 2 and 2 twill, a 3 and 1 twill, and then a 4 and 4 twill. And we're going to work on this last one here. Okay, and I'll break it all down so that hopefully it all makes sense to everybody. But in the PDF that Dawn has put in the chat, that's got all of these structures on. So if you want to explore these further in your own time, then feel free to use that handout. Okay. So this is the 4 and 4 twill again on this card here. The main difference is it's just using 2 different weights of yarn. And this is where I really see the connection with drawing, because you've got all these different weights of drawn lines in my sketchbook here, and different kind of like densities of inks happening. And you can pick this up in the yarn wrap as well. Okay. A few people that I particularly look at, I think Judith Scott is an absolutely amazing artist in terms of wrapping. It kind of takes it to a whole different level compared to what we're doing. And then there's also this work here by Decca, who does really beautiful weavings with paper, but again, using the same structures, similar structures to the ones we're going to use today. So I'm not going to go through this slide because I'm going to show you on video in a second the materials you might want. These are the structures we're going to use. We're going to particularly focus on this orange structure up here, and I'll break that down when I come to the live video. And then, well, let's just get on with it. I know Dawn's already mentioned the Drawing for Textiles workshop series I'm going to be running. Okay. So I'm going to exit this. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. People can interrupt me, whatever. I'm going to now, on my wheelie chair, turn around. Okay. And I believe that Dawn is going to share that. Yes. So now you're going to get the back of me. Okay. So Can you all hear me? Is that all okay? If you can hear me okay, give me a thumbs up. If not,
yes, we can hear you.
Brilliant. Okay, so over here, we can see the really kind of like the basic items that you need. Now it's not in focus. Is it in focus for anybody else?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay, so I've got scissors, I've got some card. Okay, this can be old card. Often if you are a teacher or a student, you've got old bits of mouthboard lying around. I think these are really nice for that. For the session I'm going to be showing you, I'm going to actually be using 2 different colours of yarn, but if you've only got 1 shade of yarn, that's absolutely fine. And then tape. I use just the washi tape to hold things in place on the back. So while things might look really neat on the front of our card wrap, there's all kinds of nonsense going on the back there. Okay, so you can see there I'm using tape just to hold things down. But seeing as these are usually going onto boards or into sketchbooks, I personally find that. So in terms of other yarns that you might have around, okay, so we might have some fancy yarns. You might actually only have cotton thread that you use on the sewing machine. You can do some really beautiful weavings with really fine threads. Okay, it might be some knitting yarns, it may be string, it really doesn't matter. I think it's can be super playful in that way. Okay, so I will show you what we'll use for the play drawing boards later on. Okay, but for now, what we're going to do is we are going to start by making a yarn wrap. Okay, so we're going to attach our yarns onto our card. Okay, and what I'm suggesting that you do, okay, is you do 4 of one colour, then 4 of the other colour, and then again back to 4 of the original colour, and so on. So in this case, it's 4 black, 4 white, 4 black, 4 white. So we've got 16, what we would in weave terms, ends. Okay, and the way I'm considering this is the yarns that are put onto the board are the equivalent of the warp on a loom. Okay, so let's do that. I don't know how many people are going to be doing this with me as we go. I'm just going to get on with it and natter away as I go. Okay, so let's just move these bits and pieces out of the way a bit. So I'm just going to start off with my black yarn. Okay. And what's quite nice about these is they're both a slightly different texture as well. So I'm just going to put a little knot in the end. It's not necessarily crucial, but I tend to kind of pull things quite tightly. So a knot just helps hold it in place. So I'm just going to attach it onto the back. Okay. What is, I would say quite important is often when people, if you're doing a yarn wrap, then often people will butt the yarns up to each other. However, because we're going to weave onto this, we do need to leave a small gap in there, so that when we are putting our weft yarn and threading that yarn into this, we will be able to have some movement there. That's what happens on cloth, on looms. If it's too tight, you actually can't weave it. So just as I've done those 4 there, I'm just going to quickly put some tape down here. Okay, this is interesting not being able to see what anybody else is doing here. But let's just keep going. If I'm going too fast, shout up. We can always not do everything that's in the plan. Okay. I'm just now adding on my second colour. Okay. I'm a bit of a fan of that invisible Scotch tape, but I do find that Scotch tape tends to slip, the yarn slips, so I have found myself that washi tape is a bit better. So when you have slightly thicker yarn, I would leave the gap even a bit bigger, okay, especially as I'm going to be weaving in this thick yarn, the same yarn that's in my warp. I'm going to weave it into my weft, as my weft, in just a minute. Okay, so I'm just keeping those attached. Okay, I'm just going to pull that white yarn out of the way. I'm just going to carry on with this black yarn. Okay, I'm also I've done it onto a coloured ground, so hopefully it's a bit clearer to you so you can see the gaps. If I did this on white card, I think it would be a bit harder to see. Now I think those are a bit too spaced apart this time, so I'm just going to just slightly adjust those. So, and I'm doing this pretty neatly, okay? Anybody who knows me knows I'm not actually always that neat. In my drawing and often in my making, I quite like to just see how things go. But I do think when it's appropriate to be neat, it's helpful to do it more precisely. So And I think this is quite a nice one for students, because often, and I am assuming that we've got a lot of teachers here, students here. It's really nice because often a lot of schools and colleges, they don't actually have loom equipment, weaving equipment. So this is quite a nice way just to be introduced to the idea of weaving, just to kind of extend people's kind of like knowledge and understanding of what textiles can be if you choose to study it further. Most people kind of go to university with experience of print and embroidery, but few go in with such experience of woven textiles or knitted textiles, unless like one of the grandparents have taught them it. So I'm just tying off a knot there, but you don't have to. If this was a really big yarn wrap, then I would be more precise about it, but because it's quite a small one, it's not so likely to cause any problems. So that's our yarn wrap. Okay, so while people are finishing doing that, so the PDF that Dawn has put into the chat, okay, looks like this. Okay, it's 2 sheets. So we've got 5 different structures here. Okay, I'm actually going to focus on this one here. Okay, now there's a few things that you might want to consider, and I've written those down there. So this is just quite a nice reminder if you've printed this off. I don't know if this is actually in focus. I think it's in focus up there, isn't it? Okay, so so we put the yarn around the card. The yarn that goes around the card, just repeating, is, I'm referring to the warp. The yarn that we're going to weave into it is the weft. Okay, within this kind of pink outline, okay, basically a white square is indicating where the weft thread is going to go over the top of the warp. Okay, a coloured square is going to indicate where the thread goes under the warp. Now, if you do that the opposite way around, you're just going to get the opposite weave structure. And that's not necessarily a problem. That can be a really exciting thing. But what I would suggest you either stick with one way or the other. Okay, these are only on card, they're not on a loom. It's not going into production, so we're all right. Okay. The other thing which is different from weaving on a loom, if we were weaving on a loom, we would be weaving from one side to the other. And so we weave from right to left and left to right. For the yarn wraps, bring this one over here. Okay, what you can see here is I actually thread the weft all the way around, so it goes right around the back. So I only weave from right to left, but that's because I'm right-handed. If you are left-handed, you can do this. I suggest going from left to right, but you would just read the patterns like from the different sides. So let me just bring in my larger version of this design. Okay. So weave is a funny old thing. Reading weave structures, okay. We actually, or rather in England, okay, in different parts of the world, even in Scotland, you read things, weave structures differently. So, so the way I was taught and what happens in Yorkshire, Huddersfield's a big centre for weave around, global kind of like weave reputation. We read from the bottom, okay, and we read from bottom up, okay. For today, while we're going to be weaving around these cards, what we're going to do is we're going to actually read from the bottom, and I'm going to use a graph pen, so you can see there. I'm actually going to start reading it, the bottom line, from right to left, because I'm right-handed and I'm going to thread this from the right, okay? If you're left-handed, okay, you might want to read from the left and read that way, okay? And then once we put that thread in, we're going to wrap it around the card and then we'll read it from this side, okay? Again, and if you're left-handed, stick with the left side. Okay. So the colours that are under here, okay, they're not part of the weave structure, they're just indicating the striping that I've got. So I've got my darker thread there and my lighter thread there. So it's just to remind me sometimes where I've got up to, it's quite useful. So I'm going to start weaving with my dark weft. Okay, how am I doing for time? Okay, okay. So, because I want to start weaving from the right, I'm just going to stick this on the back here. Okay. And then I've just threaded up a needle. Oh, I didn't mention the needles that you need earlier on. I'm just using some big darning needles. Okay, I've got needles that have got a sharp end. Obviously most needles do, but some needles actually are less sharp on the end. If it's a really sharp end, I tend to actually thread it through with the threading end. Otherwise, if I've got a really sharp needle here, it gets caught in the yarns very easily. So I'm actually going to just thread it through backwards. So, reading from the bottom here, okay, I'm just going to come through here. So, as I mentioned earlier on, if there's a coloured square, okay, I'm going to go underneath the warp. Okay, so I've got 3 coloured squares first. So I'm going to go underneath from the right, the first 3 warp yarns. Okay, and then I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 white squares, which means I go over 4 of the warp yarns. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to go back under here, and then I've got 4 orange. So I go under the next 4, and then over the next 4, and then just under this last one. If you are reading this from left to right, okay, you would go under 1, over 4, under 4, over 4, under 3. So you just read it the other way around, but the rules about going under and over still apply. Have I lost anybody yet? Maybe. Who knows? It's all silent. Everybody's actually put the mute on, so I'll just keep on going. As I say, if you've got any questions, put them in the questions in the chat, and Dawn, feel free just to shout out any questions as we're going. Thank you, Jenny. It all makes sense. Good. So I've wrapped it around the back, and I'm ready to come back round my board. Okay, on the front, I'm now on my second row. So I'm going to go, so I've got 2 orange squares, so that means I've got to go under the first 2, over the next 4, under 4, over 4, and then under the last 2. Because I've got quite a long needle with this black thread, I can kind of do it in one go. But if you just need to kind of come up and go down as you need to, that's absolutely fine. Okay, keep going, Perren, keep going. So I've gone back round the back again, not worrying about how messy the back is. Okay, and I'm going to go on to my third line. So I got 1 orange square, so under 1, over 4, under 4, over 4, and under 3. And this is not exactly the same as weaving on a loom, but we are certainly weaving a classic structure, a twill structure that anybody who's been on a loom will have been introduced to. Okay. So this particular, I'll just read out the next one. Okay, is I'm going to go over the first 4, under 4. This is quite a nice one because they're in a box of 4 colours. So this particular technique, so it's called a twill, a 4 and 4 twill. So essentially it's meaning it's kind of going over and under 4 at a time. Okay, And because of the banding of the way that we've done the colours, the kind of technique is called colour and weave effect. So essentially, by changing the weave structure, or by changing the number of colours that you have of each of the threads, you're going to get a different pattern. So if I weave this same pattern, but I've got block stripes of 2 and 2 and 2 instead of 4s, then the pattern will actually look completely different, even though it's the same structure. The same as if it was all a solid colour, or if it was blocks of 8, you just get different kinds of structures. And this one is a dog-tooth check, made famous, I think, particularly by Chanel. So I'm just going to fold that off on the back there. And I'm going to bring in my white thread. I'm not. I need to get a move on. I'm coming around the right hand side first. So I've used my lovely checkered gridded washi tape as well. I do like a good grid, but also I thought it's perfect for weaving, and you can see exactly how I'm doing it. I could do that in white and it'd be more disguised. So I'm on my 5th row now, and an easy way of saying, because I've just changed colours, I'm now in this block, so I know that this is my next row, or if you're left-handed, this side is. So I'm going to go over 3, under 4, over 4, under do, and then I've got 1 to go over at the point. Just bring that through. Long thread. What other things am I thinking of telling about? So this is really nice to play around with different kinds of yarns. So it might be that the yarns are actually the same colour or very similar colours, but actually you've got different thicknesses of yarns. So that's going to give a really lovely effect. It might be the different kinds of yarns. So it might be that they are actually, let me just check. So I'm going to go over to wonderful. It might be the different quality yarns. So it might be a paper yarn and a woolen yarn. So they're going to just react quite differently to each other, which is a really nice, again, just an experimental way of doing things. And often we've got quite a lot of things around. It might be an elastic band that you've cut and you're wrapping around, and then doing that with some silk. So you get a real contrast there. So I'm going to whiz through this one quite quickly. And then I want to show you the other one. So you can either, I don't know how far you've got with this, you can either carry on, okay, and then keep notes on what I do with the next one, or you can join in with the next one. The next one might be more your cup of tea if you like to just be a bit more playful with what we're doing here. So I don't know if you've noticed as we're going on here, I do, let me get the angle of that right, okay. I do just pull these yarns down. I can beat them down more, okay, and make it more compact if I want to, or I'm leaving quite a nice kind of like even spacing in them.
Nicola, Jen is asking, are there any yarns which you would not recommend working with? She works with years 5 to 10 in Australia and needs them to feel successful.
What yarns wouldn't I use? I wouldn't use yarns that are too fine, okay? A thicker, not necessarily chunky, but a thicker yarn. When you're working, if anybody out there is having a go at playing with fine yarns today, what you'll notice is something that I'm making quite big here, okay, will actually they might not have even got 0.5 centimetre yet. And so that can be quite frustrating if you're wanting to kind of introduce this idea. Other yarns that could be challenging are yarns that are quite elasticated. So if you feel confident with yarns and different materials, it's not actually an issue. But if you've got somebody who's feeling a bit kind of like nervous and things aren't, what might happen is things might distort quite a bit. So if somebody's wanting something to be quite neat and tidy, that can be quite difficult. But if you've got a student who wants to just be really experimental and see what happens and are quite open to that idea, then I think actually that would be quite a nice thing to do. That would be my thoughts. But cottons are really nice, wools are good, but also just cheaper acrylic and hand knit yarns can be nice to experiment with. I think something else that can happen is if you work with natural materials such as wools and cottons and silks, or paper yarns even, then you could play around with dyeing the yarns as well before you then start to weave with them. So you can start to understand the wider process involved in weaving, and you can get some really lovely effects, particularly if, say, like one of the yarns has been hand dyed. It's probably not very even, and so you're going to get a mottled effect. And then if you can contrast that with a yarn that's been dyed previously, then it will probably be quite solid. So you're going to get some really nice subtlety happening there. So that will be my thoughts on yarns in a nutshell. Okay, so I'm going to leave it at that. Feel free. I think this is quite nice to complete as doing a full repeat of that. So you can see here I've got exactly the same happening in the warp and in the weft. So I've got 16 warp yarns and 16 weft yarns there. Just because we only have an hour and I wanted to show you something else, I'm going to now leave that one. I'll finish it later and move on. They're quite a nice contrast together, aren't they? But isn't that amazing how they're the same structure, but just because the yarns aren't so different in terms of scale, it does actually, you can already start to see how the differences might happen. And that pink obviously changes the kind of like the language of it as well. This feels more classical, whereas this one feels much, arguably, more contemporary and maybe even more youthful, shall we say. So, if you've really enjoyed that and you just want to kind of carry on, you could even on the same board start with a different weave structure. So I've got the 4 and 4 twill there, and then I went on to weaving the plain weave here, which is really interesting how you carry on, you can see how you can get solid areas of one colour and mixes of others. Okay, so let's play around with one of the drawing based structures. How are we doing? Time. So this is my box of goodies. Okay, of course, got big orange stickers. Okay, can't go wrong. I didn't bring the googly eyes out today though. So I've got a plastic, like a tape, plasticized yarn there, which is really lovely. I think they're a really lovely contrast, aren't they? Look at that beauty. So I think I'm going to play with those. I've got one of these big chalk pens, so I want to make some quick marks. Got some alcohol ink there, which will dry really quickly, some tape. And I've also got some scraps of fabric. So I'm going to see how I can integrate these into a drawing-based one. So for a drawing-based one, I might have a drawing in a sketchbook next to me, and I might be thinking about that. I might be thinking about the proportions and the different kinds of materials. So, for example, with this more plastic-based shiny yarn here, it might have been, I might have been drawing with an acrylic paint. I may have been using biro really heavily, so it gets that sheen to it. But there may also be some pastel drawing going on the same drawing, in which case something like this, which is really matte, can be a really nice kind of contrast. So you might be thinking about the materials that you've been using in your drawing. Or there's a lot of students out there who are just very nervous about the idea of drawing. And so I think this is quite a nice way just to play and do some drawings, but with materials And then what's a really nice thing to do is then do drawing studies of whatever you do on the card. So you're making your own artifacts and making your own resources to then do drawings from. So let's put some of this. Why not? I'm feeling in a pink mood today. I won't put too much on because I do need it to dry. Oh, hello. Look at you. Okay. Got some tape here. Iridescent tape. Just been doing some black and white drawings. Can you tell? I feel the need to play with colour. So tapes are a really nice thing to play around with. I think you can even do play around with bead structures by putting the tapes on in different orders so that you've got structures going on one. Ooh, look at that. Pretty. Okay. Let's put some greens on. Okay, so I'm creating kind of like a base to my board. Okay, it's this idea of drawing. Let's just put some marks in here as well. So we can really treat it as a drawing. And now I'm going to start to add some yarns onto here. I might even, maybe actually I will put this one. I think it's quite nice to, particularly if you're working with students, you might be a student watching this. I think it's really nice seeing somebody do these things, particularly when they have no plan. Because often I think people worry that they don't, they might go wrong, it's not going to be neat enough, or whatever. It's quite nice to see somebody experiment and play around with these things and make mistakes and go wrong, but not necessarily panic over it. Just go, okay, well, what am I going to do about it now? So that can be quite a nice confidence building for people to see mistakes being made. So I'm a big fan of believing that all the best ideas come from mistakes. Nearly always, anyway, I think. So I'm just going to kind of place it in. And then what I'm going to do is actually, rather than always weaving around, I'm actually just going to weave backwards and forwards. Might do some plain weave. I might do one of my other structures that I put onto that worksheet. I might just see what happens, just go thread it. That's probably a bad needle. On this, let's go with that one. Okay, so I'm going to start. Let's just attach this thread here on the back. Again, I would probably take a bit more time actually and knot these because they may come unstuck. But we only had an hour. So again, I'm not going to go with the sharp end. Just going to weave through. And here. Just going to leave that. That's quite nice. Just seeing how that's curling around there. And then rather than going all the way round, I'm just actually going to turn myself back and just weave back through there. So this is more like weaving on a loom, where you would actually weave from right to left and left to right. Do we have any more questions? Anybody thinking of some other things that you would do?
If anybody wants to write questions in the chat for Nicola to answer. None yet.
None yet. That's fine. Either everybody's been put, maybe people are listening to this to get a good early night. And
Patricia's wanting to know, where did you get that delicious green shiny tape from?
Oh, that's a really good question. I have a feeling it was in Paper Chase. It's amazing though, isn't it? Look at that. Ooh. It is super beautiful. I think it was Paper Chase. Or, do you know, it might have been Sainsbury's. I was probably trying to buy it for my daughter, but I ended up keeping it myself. What else? I wanted to show you the backs of some of those other wraps that I had done before.
There's lots of nice comments coming through anyway. Too busy concentrating to think of questions, says Sue.
Okay, that's good. That's good. That's all right. You don't need to have questions.
Angie's saying she works with all boys and don't do textiles, but they do photography. This would be amazing done over portraits. They might like the maths aspect, she thinks.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. And I think introducing different materials as well, working with boys can be really useful. They tend to be kind of like, in my experience when I've worked with male students, tend to be interested in, this is actually a really beautiful paper yarn. And so again, kind of thinking about kind of like weaving ideas you can then print onto. You can buy plain paper yarns. You could buy a black yarn and a white yarn, and then you can be weaving those patterns, and then they can print images straight onto them, which can be really nice. You can transfer print onto them as well if they're fabric, especially if they're synthetic. So that can be quite a nice way of approaching it. But yeah, whenever I've even though you don't get so many male students applying to go to university to do textiles, whenever I've done workshops in schools with boys, they've really enjoyed doing the weaving in particular. Seem to enjoy that more than the stitch kind of work. So I'm going to leave that. I'm not even going to tie it off. I think I just want to have it with a tail, so it moves around. That's quite nice. Okay.
Jenny has said that she likes functional pieces more so than aesthetic pieces, which is sort of what you've created there. How do you suggest students incorporate their weaving wraps into other projects, such as bookmarks or actual functional things, I suppose?
Yes, well, you can. So we've just been using cards today. So obviously you can do that. What you could do is, because these are kind of quite raised, if you're using flatter yarns, finer yarns, then you can get something which, I guess one of the issues with these and these kind of things is quite long floats on there, which things can get caught. And so what you could be doing is you could be putting little notches in there. You could do this onto different materials, onto plastic. I don't know if you have access to laser cutters, so you could cut these into shapes so that the yarn sits into it a little bit more. And by doing things like the plain weave, this structure, so I picked a structure which is very decorative, but the plain weave, as you can see on, excuse me, here, okay, so if you can see that it doesn't really have the roots. So you can be using it for that. You can be making these to create patches for clothing, for textiles. You can actually do this with, oh, what's it called? So I'm not a product design person, you know, like not balsa wood, but really thin pieces of wood, like bamboo, cane.
Veneer.
Veneer, yes, yeah, absolutely. Cane. It can be done with really thin strips of acetate, and then you can heat treat it afterwards to bind it together more. So in terms of products, the product ranges, I haven't necessarily got ideas for that, but I've definitely got ideas about how you can take this approach, do it slightly differently so that it fits into other kinds of products. So I hope that makes sense.
Would this work over a canvas for a final piece?
Absolutely. So you can go around the back of the canvas. What you could also do with the canvas is, rather than wrap it around, you can actually stitch the, so if we imagine this was the full canvas, these could be stitched into the canvas rather than wrapping around the edges. And then you can then do weaving. You could do some really interesting shapes with that as well. And you can even use bits of card that you put into it temporarily, just to kind of like help you create shapes, so that when you're weaving you can get different kinds of angles on the weaves as well.
So we have about sort of 6-7 minutes left if anybody else has got any other questions. So Dina is saying, how would you take the weave off the card and use the technique as a patch pocket, for example, without unraveling the weave? Oh, now that's tricky. I'm not sure you could. I think you'd have to prep it first, wouldn't you?
I do have a trick for that, actually.
Oh.
So what you can do is you can either do a series of double half hitch knots on the back, okay, or even easier is actually, you'd have to take the tape off, or tape it more in the middle, and then you can iron on, depending on what your yarns are, Bonder web on the back of this, okay, and then you can then cut through it, and in theory all the yarns will be stuck to the Bonder web, and then you can then cut it out as you need. Does that make sense? Even if it's temporarily, to take it to a sewing machine to create a sewn board border for your patch, for example.
Sarah, it's Bonder web, not Bonder web. It is Bonder web, which is an iron-on tape or piece of fabric.
Yes, yes. If you get the Bonder web, or whatever it's called, it's just got the stickiness on one side. It's actually a technique that I use with the weavers, with my weave students, with fabric. So we would often just iron on a really thin strip of Bonder web, and then we would cut through the Bonder web. So it was just a really fine kind of like edging, because it can give a kind of a crispiness to it. But with something like this, it's fine. But on the fabric, on the loom, which is often woven more finely, it can be a bit of a strange edge. So this was one of the boards that I was showing you. Let me clear my space a little bit. Okay. This is one of the boards I showed earlier on in the PowerPoint. This is how it's been woven. You can just see there's a whole load of tape, there you go, on the back. So I would start off here, okay, and I've woven, wrapped, say 5 ends of the beige first, and then I've done 5 beige that way. And then I've done 2 orange that way, and then 2 orange that way. And you just keep on doing it backwards and forwards, going from one side wrapping to the other side wrapping until you build up. And there's a whole range of different, so this was using the same 4 colours. So you can start in the middle and work your way out. You can even start to create whatever that would be called. Can't think at the moment, if you can see that. It's like a pyramid structure, okay? Or you can be just actually doing them with tapes, actual tape as well. So this is one I've done with just cotton thread from a sewing machine. So you can see it can get really, really fine and detailed. So I think
they're fab. Have we come to the end?
So I think so for now. The only other thing I haven't mentioned is weaving around other objects. I'll show you very quickly. This is a fork, for example. So this is just weaving in and out. So the prongs of the fork count as the warp. and I'm just weaving those in and out. You can do them around stones, around all kinds of things, as long as you can kind of stick something on the back to hold it in place.
Oh, somebody's just asked about wrapping around a stone. Would you have to have an underneath side to hide all the ends?
Yeah. There are ways of doing it with really careful knotwork so that you can't see all of that, but that's a whole different skill level too.
That's another workshop by the sound of it.
That's a different, that's a good way of putting it, a different workshop. So but yeah, I think it's just really fun just to kind of like play around with kind of textile based materials, associated materials, drawing on the boards, but the back of it is just fit. Okay.
So much. I'm
back to the here.
unspot you.
Unspot me. There we go.
And just put you there so that everybody can see your face.
These are the hands, the same hands. My fat little fingers.
So much, Nicola. It's been brilliant. And just to remind everybody and those people who didn't join at the beginning that Nicola is doing a series of 5 workshops drawing for textiles starting on Wednesday, the 19th of April, and it's up on the website now. So 5 workshops, which will be an hour and a half long each. Thank you everybody for coming. It's been a fantastic turnout and a really brilliant workshop, and there's some great comments coming through, Nicola.
Oh, that's nice. Oh, look at all those messages.
I know, it's brilliant.
That's cool. So yeah, I'm going to do a recording of this as well separately, so it might cover some of the questions that have been asked for your YouTube channel. Which will include the PowerPoint.
I'll send you the chat box as well, so you've got all the questions.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your time. And hope to see you again.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go on.
Hi. Sorry. On the Facebook page, you don't allow pages on the Textiles Skills Center.
Okay.
Would it be possible to allow pages to be on? It's just because I have I'm an artist, and I just have an artist page, and so I just joined through.
Okay, I'm with you now. I was wondering what you're talking about. Yes, of course, I can do that. I'll change that for you.
Thank you so much, because everywhere I go, and I don't have like a separate account. I'm just trying to. Also, I'm trying to like you just be Otherwise, I'd have to create another account under like the artist name, and it just.
Don't worry. I'll sort it.
Oh, thank you so much.
Okay.
But it's been great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.